Hello everyone, my name is Shruti Sharma and in this year in the Civil Services examination I got AIR 1. Today I'm having a session regarding mainly answer writing as to how I approached answer writing in my general studies papers. I got a total of 494 marks in my general studies papers, and there were a few things that I tried to do before the examination in terms of preparing a strategy for it, preparing some content for it. So I'm going to try to share what I did during this time. As to how this session is going to be structured, firstly I'll talk about certain basic things that you can apply in all 4 papers, and then we're going to go paper wise, where GS1 certain questions will be seen, and I'm going to try to pick up a few questions from this year's mains examination, and we'll see as to how they can be tackled. First GS1, then 2, then 3 and 4. So without further ado, let me jump straight into it. Firstly is understanding the basics of answer writing. So there are a few things which I think are important. Firstly is the idea of understanding the question. Understanding the question, I feel if you just understand the question to a certain extent and only answer what is being asked of you, then more than half of, or at least half of your work is done. Because sometimes, especially at the very beginning of our preparation, we just see certain keywords in the question and answer whatever we know of that specific topic. And that's in that process somewhere, the point of the question we forget, and midway through it, we start writing anything and everything, and by the conclusion, what you're writing is completely different from what is being asked in the question. So make sure that you have the question always in mind, break it up into certain parts, underline keywords in the question. Sometimes, you can divide it into A and B parts, sometimes you can write it in paragraph form or in point form, but based on what the question is demanding. Secondly, in corollary to this, and I think if you understand the question also, coherence in the question, in the answer writing also comes. Because some people have this, I think, needless debate on whether you should write in paragraphs or whether you should write in points. I feel as long as you're able to express a good number of points and in a good flow with maximum coherence. Point making does not mean that, the examiner is not able to understand what you're writing. So coherence is very, very important. So for example, with respect to this first point, there was this question in GS3 this year about blue LEDs, about a Nobel Prize which had been given to the discovery of blue LEDs in the 1990s. But if, for example, you completely do not answer the question and answer whatever you know about LEDs, the point of the question completely goes away, and it's very likely that you'll get very less marks. Even if you know whatever limited information about blue LEDs, try to shape your current knowledge according to what is being asked. So try to write about blue LEDs and what you think they are and how they can, help us in daily life. So this is understanding the question. With respect to, again, flow, legibility and coherence, you can choose whatever you like, are more comfortable with, whether it's paragraph or it's points. I personally was more comfortable with points, so I chose that because I felt I could include more dimensions in it. But the flow should not be hampered at any point. Second is, again, a very, very important part in answer writing and a balance that many people find very difficult to sort of balance: speed versus content. And I think no part of this should be neglected. If you're, for example, you have good handwriting speed, you can complete all your 20 questions, but you don't have the necessary content, there's no point in it. Similarly, if you have the content and you're writing, say, the first 5 answers really nicely with a lot of good content, good handwriting, good pictures, but you're leaving the last 5 questions or leaving the last 3-4 questions, then you won't get the desired marks that you want. So a balance between both speed and content is required. You need to understand that content building happens before you enter the examination hall. So make sure that you have good content ready with you. And how will you have good content ready with you? You need to keep in mind the syllabus, you need to keep in mind the previous year question papers, and have at least 1 or 2 pages of information and content based on the syllabus that you have. And keywords are mentioned in the syllabus, which you should definitely work on. And here, in terms of content, I think, say for example, GS3 paper this time, there were a lot of questions which most of us did not know who attempted the paper. But at the same time, we know that there are certain low-hanging fruits which you do prepare. Even in GS3, you can get sort of good marks in those questions. So for example, in GS1, there are social issues, clear-cut mention of topics in the syllabus which do come. So for example, population, urbanization, women's issues, you can at least prepare 1 or 2 pages of notes. Similarly, for GS3, questions on internal security. 4 questions definitely, 3 or 4 questions definitely come on internal security, and you can definitely answer them if you have good notes prepared, and that won't take too much time. So the effort you put in internal security versus the reward that you will get in GS3 are very, very commensurate, right? So identify those areas where you can build good content, and that will help you. Similarly, cyber security. Similarly, say in GS3 there's food processing, in GS2 there's governance related issues, NGOs, SHGs. Questions from those topics come necessarily 1 or 2 each year. So prepare good content on them. Apart from that also, focus on building good content which you can use in your answers. At the same time, practice for good speed. If you have good content, doesn't mean that you can translate it into speed unless and until you practice answer writing. So for speed, the only thing that I would suggest to you is do answer writing. Even in the 3-hour paper, make certain internal sort of limits on yourself. Put certain internal limits on yourself ki acha 1 ghante mein I'll complete these many questions, half an hour mein these many questions, and stick to it, right? So this is speed. Third, once you have speed, you have content, you have understood the question, then comes structuring of the question. And the structuring can be of 2 types. First is the content-based structuring, and the second is the spatial structuring, right? So in terms of content-based structuring, firstly, you know there's an introduction, there's a body, there's a conclusion. So this is usually the structure we follow in terms of how we plan out our answer. Sometimes this can, change a little bit, that's completely fine, but usually you should have a 2-3 line introduction, then followed by a body with a certain number of points, or even if you're not writing in point form, but there should be a certain amount of matter or more than one dimension only that you're looking at. So the more the dimensions you have in your answer, the more it's likely to fetch you more marks, right? And then you have a conclusion which can be forward looking, which can include good terms, it can include good examples, it can include a way forward in terms of suggestions. So all of that you can work on. Again, in terms of content, you should always go back to what the question is asking, and therefore divide your main question into say 2 parts or 3 parts. If it has 3 parts, the question, divide it into 3 parts and answer accordingly, right? So this is for content structuring. For spatial structuring, I think you need to understand that, this is the page which has been given to you, to utilize it to the maximum possible. And sometimes people say that, I don't have good handwriting, how do I, then fetch good marks, the examiner will not want to read my copies. But the most you can do out of it is, for example, if this is the question which is answered here, start writing here, then underline keywords to, get the attention of the examiner. Then you can, this is the first, say the first part of the question is here, so you start writing it here. Then within it, you start writing points here, right? And then if there's a further sub point to it, you start writing it here. So in terms of spatial structuring, you can start from here, then leave a margin, write points here, then for sub points, you can write it here. For examples, if I had to write, I use a triangle. For points, if I had to write, I like to use like circles. So these are little things you can do in terms of, making your answer look more, utilizing the space which has been given to you in that one page. So that is in terms of structuring. Then we come to the 4th point, which is embellishments, which is like I call embellishments in terms of like you're adding things to your answer. Apart, so there are certain people who follow all of these 3 things, still they're not getting the adequate amount of marks to make the top ranks or make a good cut in terms of mains examination. So what I think helped me this time around, and I tried to work on it, was working on adding additional things. So it could include examples, which I personally sort of used to scour out the newspaper for certain examples which I could use according to the syllabus in each paper. Then committee names in say GS2 paper, or data in GS3, in economy, in environment. Then certain government reports are there. So economic survey, you can cite that, this is something that the economic survey said in GS3. Similarly, you can talk about any key terms that you can find. So anything which adds to the answer in terms of examples, in terms of, and also in terms of diagrams and maps, especially in say GS1 in geography, you can use that. I used some maps in history as well. So anything that you can, flow charts in GS3. So have a ready collection of them. If you don't have, you can, there are certain materials you can access, or a certain corpus copies or collections that other people have given. So try to add stuff if all of this work has been done. So remember that embellishments, you can't like just start by adding embellishments only, and that won't add content to your answer. Make sure that your basics are strong, your content is strong, your structuring is fine, your speed is fine, and then focus on adding the extra marks fetching things that will make your copy stand apart from the previous person, right? And then based on all of these 4 things, what you have to do is you have to practice. Practice means, if you're doing practice at home, writing a few answers every day, that is fine. If you're showing it to someone else, that is fine. If you're enrolled in a test series, attempt those test series rigorously, attempt those test series within the fixed time limit, set those time limits upon yourself. Once you've written, then analyze your performance. In terms of that, analysis can be done, say whatever feedback you've been given by the mentor, by whoever has checked your copy. If you're showing to a friend who has written the examination and can give you some advice, he or she can analyze the copy. You yourself can analyze your copy based on the model answer that has been given to you, based on any other material that you find on the internet. But that analysis should be done very judiciously. You need not take every advice that you get. You need not add every single point that you get. You need to prioritize the points. Even when you're writing points in any of the 4 papers, I think it's important to write the best point the first, because sometimes there are 10 points you can write in an answer. You don't have the time, you don't have the space for all of that. So write the best answer, best point first, and then accordingly, according to importance. And by the end, by chance, if you don't have enough time left, you can leave out the other points. But if you leave the good point for the end, then it's most likely that you won't get adequate amount of marks, right? So analyze what you have to do, analyze your loopholes, analyze based on all these parameters where you're lacking, work on it. And then most importantly, just don't answer write, just don't do answer writing randomly, but try to improve. So the next paper that you're writing based on this analysis, make sure before you're sitting down for writing the next paper that, in this paper specifically, I will make sure that I will write an introduction like this. If I get a question on social issues based on, say, secularism, this is something that I will use in the introduction. Last time I did not, write enough points. I will make sure that I write at least 7 points in a 10 marker. Something like that. So make those targets for yourself and make sure that you improve the next time you write, and you're not writing the same thing again and again and not improving. So this is the basics, I feel, for all 4 papers that you need to follow. Now I'm going to talk about specific papers and what you can do in each paper and how I went about it, right? So now we come to GS1. GS1 mein first is history, right? History in terms of content, you would already have worked upon, say you would have gone through your spectrum, you'd gone through your whatever books that you've gone through during a prelims preparation, or if you're not doing that. Again, I'd like to say that for people who are giving the mains this time, well and good, you consolidate your material and use or whatever tips that you can from this point. But people who are not giving their mains this time and who have their mains say next year or the year after that, make sure that you're doing all of this content building at least from now on, because you know what makes a good answer, and these content building does not happen in a day. So make sure that you're adding those examples, those committees, those quotes, and all those embellishments I talked about in the very beginning. Anyway, so history, we were talking about any history questions. Again, you'll have an introduction, you'll have a body, you'll have a conclusion. Now people often ask, what do you write in a history question? Because sometimes, say in GS2 and GS3, you can write committees, you can write data, but say history, a question is asked about the repercussions of the Nehru report of 1828, and I remember us answering a question about the Nehru report of Nehru report was a bunch of uneasy compromises between A and B. Or say if we pick up 2 questions this time from the GS paper, GS1 paper 2021, first question was evaluate, so I'm going to just read it out. evaluate the nature of Bhakti literature and its contribution to Indian culture. And then the second question was regarding socio-religious reform and its impact. The point that I'm trying to make is that how do you approach these questions and how do you answer them? So firstly, I believe in introduction, an easy thing that you can probably do if you say don't have a history background or you think how to make history introductions, you can start with talking about details of the question. You can mention years, you can mention say key figures. So if the question is asked about Delhi Sultanate, something about the Delhi Sultanate, its cultural history, or something about a particular maritime history or something like that, you can just start simply, rather than getting too bogged down by the question. You can just start by saying the Delhi Sultanate was from this to this period, key representations of this being the ABC rulers, right? So you can start with that, or say the Nehru report question that I talked about. So you can just mention that the Nehru report was compiled or made in 1928 by Motilal Nehru, headed by Motilal Nehru, in response to a challenge by there was this particular viceroy, I can't remember right now, right? So just start with these certain details, so it gives a nice sort of beginning to the answer. Similarly, for this question, evaluate the nature of Bhakti literature and its contribution to Indian culture. So I personally started, and these are certain things that you can prepare also beforehand. So I started, I think, remember, with the word Bhakti, or the word Bhakti comes from the root word bhaj, meaning to participate in the divine, a movement that began in South India in the 6th to 7th centuries, right? So this can be a starting point. Similarly, for the socio-religious reform movement, and if you look at previous year question papers, it's a question that is repeated often. So I had started something regarding, I don't remember the exact thing, but I used the word Bengal Renaissance in it, and I used key figures of Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar in the introduction itself in one line, right? So these are certain things in terms of details, years, key figures, which can make your introduction nice and simple. You don't have to think too much about introduction in history. Right, so this what becomes the introduction. Then what is the body of this question? So evaluate the nature. So this is not just asking about bhakti tradition. So again, coming back to what I had talked about in the beginning, understand the question. First part of the question is evaluate the nature of bhakti literature and its contribution to Indian culture. So you can clearly identify there are two parts of the question. First is understanding the nature, and you have to evaluate it, and the second is contributions. So you begin with your introduction in terms of, say, this is blah, 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 it started at this period. Then you have to talk about, so again, in terms of making your answer better, what I did was, and this is something that I had practiced before in one of the test series answers as well, I made a map. Oh God, I've gotten out of the practice of making a map, but again, these things also you can practice making world maps, practice making Indian maps, so that you can make it quickly, right? So then I plotted down certain things. So here, for example, I'll just say Lal Ded, and then whatever, and then I'll sort of put here Mirabai. Here I'll put Kabir Granthavali. Here I'll put, say, Geeta Govind, and all of that, right? So I used to jot everything down. So what you're talking about is in one small thing, you're not talking about bhakti literature, because that's not necessarily the nature of the question, but you're just plotting as to what all are the bhakti literature in India. So in a very small space, you're talking about a certain part of the question. Then, so introduction, side mein this, then first part, nature of bhakti literature, and then you can jot down points 1, 2. So what can be the nature of bhakti literature? This is not asking what bhakti literature was, but the nature of bhakti literature. So you can talk about devotional in nature, right? Devotional nature, then you give certain example of, say, Mirabai or say Shankaracharya. So one thing that I tried to do in my answers was, when I was giving a point, I used to write that point and then tell you why that point I'm writing, right? So give an explanation or justification of what that was. So first, the nature was, it was devotional in nature. Example, this person. Secondly, say, what can be the nature of bhakti literature? It was, say, in simple language. So it could be easily sort of recited. So you can give why it was simple, this thing, and then give an example of, give an example. I'll just, fine. Give an example of, say, the Alvars and Nayanars and this thing, they were relatively simple. Then thirdly, you can write about how they were in regional and vernacular languages. So this can be a nature of this thing, right? So this is the first part of the question. Then you can talk about its contribution. So this is the second part of the question. So give equal weightage to both, right? So then you talk about the contribution in terms of, say, and remember that, you know, I am right now making it like this, but this is going to be your page. So this is the question. You start writing here. This will be the intro where you wrote whatever. Here I drew a map. So this will be the map. Here you start writing about nature. So this is point 1. Example. Point 2. Example. Similarly, point 3. Example. By chance you're done with this page, then you go to the next page because it's a 2-marker. Then you talk about the contribution, right? So contribution, you can write about, say, it led to development of Bhakti temple tradition, say, right? Because this happened. Then development of, say, then again example how, if you can, then culture of this thing, sainthood and challenge to Brahmanical Hinduism can be one. Then say in terms of vernacular, so we talked about the role of vernacular. So contribution can be development of vernacular languages across India and development of regional cultures overall. So the Bhakti tradition would lead to development of regional culture. So make sure that each point is a little different. Don't repeat points. Keep thinking of new ways in which you can approach it. And sometimes these are questions which you may not have like prepared beforehand. So try to think a little in that time period and make sure certain questions are different. And then you end with this conclusion in terms of the impact of Bhakti on India, or how the impact of the Sufis, and link it to a further sort of thing. So in terms of conclusion, I usually used, so we talked about intro, we talked about body. In terms of conclusion, what you can do in history is link it with the next period. If you can't think of something else, make it forward looking. If you're talking about world history, you can link it to India. If you're talking, say, if you're talking about the Cold War and the question is something like that, you can link it to India. Or you can, if you're talking about the Cold War, talk about the post-Cold War period in the conclusion, and try to link the question with the Cold War with what happened later, right? So link it with, make it forward looking, make it, if it's world history, you can make it about India. Another way is linking it with the next period. Sometimes you can link it with post-modern India. So if you're talking about pre-British India, link it with what happened there to what happened post-independence, link it with constitutional values. So something about Mahatma Gandhi and non-cooperation, link it about how that laid the basis for the constitution that was made, the makers of modern India, right? So these are certain things that I think you can use in a history question. 2 questions one question we talked about, the second question, socio-religious reform. Again, these are things that you can prepare. And I already talked about what can be the introduction for such questions. In terms of answering such a question, make sure that you have multiple dimensions and make sure you put a lot of data, whatever you've read in Spectrum. You don't need to go through a lot of books, Spectrum or any other sort of coaching material that you're using. Just stick to whatever you've done with that. Just keep on revising whatever you've read before the prelims, right? So this was history. Next we come to geography in GS1. Geography was never my strong point. I did the basic minimum. I just did the 11th and 12th NCRTs mainly for it. Sometimes just going through other books to look at examples or recent monthly or yearly compilations for any recent things that may have happened in geography. But again, I decided to make sure that for the introduction here, I mainly use definitions because I didn't have too much to use. For the body, again, what was being answered, a direct answer to that, I tried to use maps in this. I tried to use diagrams. If I had, if there was a possibility to make a map or a diagram in a geography question, I would not leave it. So if this time there was this question on So there were 2 questions in terms of physical geography, which I've just mentioned. वैसे तो there were more questions. First was differentiate causes of landslides in the Himalayan region and Western Ghats. So the question was landslides. And if you have good content developed on landslides, which is a very normal question, comes in disaster management also, comes in GS1 also, then you won't have too much problem. This question will not take too much time, and then you can move on to next more challenging questions. To make sure you have good content on questions that are like easy, right? So this was an easy question relatively in geography. You just start with what? You just start with an basic introduction of landslides, or what you can do is, I had a certain data on landslides as well. So I just started with, say, GSI, according to GSI, 12.6% of the land area of India is prone to landslides. And I had this like very rigorously burnt into my head because I had prepared this and had written certain questions like this, right? So this is the introduction that you follow in terms of you can use certain data. Then I drew a diagram again of a map again of India. I circled basically this place, which was basically the Himalayas, and then I underlined or shaded this place, which was the Western Ghats. And then I wrote reasons for both here and here, I think. This is something that I did in one of my papers as well, and then I think later here also. Or sometimes you can just draw, say this is 1 and this is 2, and then you can write it later. So if you make a chota sa map side mein, and you think you can't write uske aaspas, to just mark 1, mark 2, and then write 1 ke niche iske reasons and 2 ke niche iske reasons yahan par. So this is something that you can do in terms of structuring as well. So differentiate causes of landslides in Himalayan region, Western Ghats, talk about both. And if it's talking about just causes, if this is only the question and it's a 10 marker, make sure that causes occupy a major part of your answer, but at the same time, don't just leave it there. To make it a slightly better answer, also talk about solutions, right? If only the causes are answered, it will be an incomplete answer if you only write about the causes, even if it's the only thing which is answered in the question. Little bit, at least half a page, write about certain solutions. Here you can mention again differences. So Western Ghats here and Himalayas here, and different approaches that can be followed. So I remember in the Himalayas, there was a separate committee called Deepak Chopra committee. So mention that here. Right? In the Western Ghats, there was this committee called Kasturi Rangan committee. So mention these names, they'll fetch you sort of extra, that it'll show you have some sort of knowledge about both these areas and how their problems are different. So talk about certain solutions in terms of mitigation, general guidelines, whatever you're saying, try to back something, back it with something, whether it's a committee, whether it's certain guidelines that you think are there. So NDMA guidelines, certain schemes by the government. So there's this landslide susceptibility mapping in the northeast. So talk about that with respect to the Himalayas. So these are certain things with respect to the question, demand of the question, you can do. Okay, so this was geography. Similarly, there was this question on IT industries this time around only. So IT industries, it was talking about socio-economic implications. Right? So although the question was about socio-economic implications, I drew after the introduction, I think I talked about the importance of the service industry and how the IT industry, service sector in India with respect to the global world, and how the IT industries are at the central focal point of it. Then I drew again a small map here, and I drew the IT industries. This is a bad map, but basically you understand, I just jotted down the IT industries within the map. That's it. Nothing else I talked about it. Then I moved towards the part of the question where it was asking about the socio-economic implications. So then I talked about, say, the implications in terms of migration, because it was socio-economic implications. Remember, keywords of the question, it was not just asking about economic implications. So socio-economic means development of slums, development of certain industries, cluster of industries, development or issues of out-migration, in-migration, female sex ratio in the areas of out-migration. Then basic lots of other things that, you know, I can't think of right now, but socio-economic implications, make sure that you're answering what is being asked in the questions, right? So these are the 2 types of questions that can be answered in geography, physical geography and mineral or human geography. Third is social issues. And social issues, I feel if you work on a little before the mains, I think it can be very helpful. And here, this is a part of the question, a part of the paper apart from GS4 and essay, which you can be a little creative with, because the questions are also a little creative. One thing that you need to focus on, and which can fetch you more marks, is dimensions. As many dimensions you open in this answer, because they're sometimes quite open-ended, sometimes they're not, but the questions that are open-ended, if you open as many dimensions as possible, it is likely to be a good answer. Similarly, for intros and conclusions, I had certain ready templates. So for example, if it would be secularism, I had, say, Sarvadharma Sambhav, or the 12th Rock Edict of Ashoka, or something else that I would either use in the introduction or the conclusion. Communalism, something else. Diversity, I remember I had written down thali, the concept of India as a thali as compared to, say, melting pot or salad bowl model. So this is something that I used. So thali model for diversity. Then similarly for population, there's a unit. Urbanization, there's a unit. So urbanization, I had good data points on different aspects of urbanization, different sub points which I could use in a question on urbanization. For that I had prepared matter already. For population, I remember a good conclusion that I had already prepared, which I used in this year's paper, was also about how education is the best contraceptive. And there was a Sucheta Srivastav judgment which talked about reproductive choice in the context of the population debate and population control debate that was happening. So these are things that you can work on already. There are some 10 different subheadings. Make sure that you have good content on them. Make sure that in the final paper, you're trying to look at various dimensions. So if there's a question on, I remember last time or in this paper, there was this question about social values and, influence of foreign cultures on India and India on foreign cultures, right? So you can only write 1 and 2 points about it and explain it a lot, or you can write points in terms of, say, language, then dress, then, art and all of that. And don't just write it like that. Try to give examples of how these things are there. Similarly, globalization is a topic. So global in local and local in global. How does globalization affect local cultures, and how do local cultures affect globalization? There are a lot of questions which are asked on globalization year after year. So make sure that you just sit down one day and think of things that, are there. So for example, something like PUBG was there, and PUBG there was this Indian version which was Fauji, right? And something like Kaun Banega Crorepati. So Slumdog Millionaire and Who Wants to Become a Millionaire was the inspiration story behind KB. So these are ways in which globalization is affecting Indian culture, and it's somehow how it's also shaping in culture, foreign culture as well. So something like sitar music. So Anushka Shankar has taken the sitar outside to foreign worlds to the extent that pop culture outside is being influenced by fusion music. So think of these examples, sit down and prepare certain topics for social issues which can make your answer a little more interesting and different from the other person. So this was GS1. Now we come to GS2. GS2 comprises 3 things. First is polity. Second is governance issues. And third is IR. Right? For polity, what you can do, again, I'm going to talk about in terms of intro, body, conclusion. Make sure that you use a lot of articles. Whatever you've read, say for example, there's a question about elections. You can answer the question directly also, whatever it is, but it will make the answer better if you start by writing, that the Election Commission is one of, say, the 4 bulwarks. The Election Commission, under bracket Article 324, is one of the 4 bulwarks of the Constitution, etc., 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 or the Supreme Court under, say, part this of the Constitution, articles this and this, is one of the 4 bulwarks of the Constitution, something like that, right? So make sure that you use parts of the Constitution, articles of the Constitution, so that you seem like a student of polity and not just a lay person. So try to use articles, try to use committees, so especially in the way forward. So conclusion may, especially in polity, economy, all of these GS2 and GS3, in conclusion, it's always good to have a way forward, because you're not only here to talk about problems in the system but also solutions to the system. So even if it's not asked, make sure that you have certain solutions, and this way forward would, you can write your own opinions or own suggestions, but it's always better if you write something which is backed by a committee or some government report or something. So try to use committees in your way forward. Again, try to pick up these things from, say, Lakshmikant. There are things which are already there in terms of, say, recommendations of Punchi Committee, Sarkarya Committee, any other monthly compilation you're seeing. Try to go through second ARC key things for ethics and for GS2 as well. So committees is something that you can do. Go through the 17 SDG goals as well. And these SDG goals, you can use anywhere else, right? You can use these SDG goals in GS2, you can use it in GS3, you can use it in ethics, you can use it in your essay as well. Make sure that you remember all of them and use it wherever it's necessary. It's often a really nice conclusion to have, even if you can't think of anything. So if you're talking about, say, infrastructure also, so something like sustainable infrastructure, or say SDG 13, climate justice, or sustainable cities, I think, is SDG 11. So these are things that if you're talking about urbanization, if you talk about SDG 11, it's something that will be nice. SDG 5 for gender justice and so on. So these are things that you can use in the introduction, you can use in the conclusion. In terms of the body of a polity answer, I think there are certain headings you can make. So after this introduction, whatever body you have, there are certain headings that I use that you can also use to think in. So something in terms of, say, problems. If you're having problems of a certain issue, what are the problems or solutions, whatever it is? The question is legal issues, or the legal part of it, the constitutional part of it, the institutional issues that are there. So these are certain headings in which you can use to think and therefore structure your answer better, and it gives the examiner also more clarity and more coherence in the answer. Right, so say for example, this time there was this question: to what extent GS2 2021, to what extent in your view the parliament is able to ensure accountability of the executive in India, right? So how can you start this question in introduction? To what extent in your view the parliament is able to ensure accountability in the executive in India? Starting, you can just write about how the constitution makers envisaged India as a parliamentary form of government in which there are checks and balances. These checks and balances you can sort of denote by making this in terms of, say, the executive, the parliament and the judiciary, right? And then you can just say check or whatever. This itself sort of, even this shows that this is your, and try to box. This had something people told me to box whatever any diagrams or anything that I was making, right? So you draw this sort of thing where the executive, the parliament and the judiciary are putting checks on each other, and this is something that this thing mentioned. Or I remember whenever there was a question on checks and balances, I used Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws, where he talks about checks and balances in a democracy. So these are certain things that you can use in introduction. Then to what extent, in your view, the parliament is able to ensure accountability of the executive in India? So the first part of the question, this is something they've done. First part of the question will be, the parliament does hold is able to ensure accountability through various measures. So these various measures can be again divided into various ways. So say the measures that have been provided to them in terms of, say, you can talk about the motions, no confidence motion, then other R's like question R, this. So there are various ways, and you can talk about, then you can talk about, say, parliamentary committees, this, that. And then, so there are various points. These are a few that I can remember right now. But firstly, talk about one side of the question. Then the question is to what extent. So then go to the other part that, yet it has not been able to properly sort of do this. Why? Because of ABC reasons. Here, try to give examples. So, for example, a certain percentage of the bills have only gone to the parliamentary committees. This is something which has happened. The issue of having a large majority in the government. So, the parliament is majorly comprised of the executive only. So, things like that. So, try to make So at least if there are 2 parts of the question, make sure that you have at least 5 points here, at least 4 to 5 points there as well, and write in one line only if you can do that, and if you can make it legible and coherent. If you're writing in points, if you're writing in paragraphs, that is also fine if that works by you, right? So 5 points here, other part of the question 5 points there, and then end with a conclusion in terms of certain suggestions that have been made by certain committees, say second ARC, say the NCRWC, National Committee to do that, or certain NGOs have made certain recommendations that all bills should compulsorily go to the parliament to uphold the spirit of democracy. So with certain positive words like spirit of democracy and committee recommendations, you can end this answer. Right, so this is for polity, some things you can do. Then again, governance, I would like to say that go back to whatever I had said for social issues. Make sure that you have a certain amount of notes prepared for all of this. My personal strategy was to also use a lot of examples. So say Odisha ka Mo Sarkar initiative, for education, the Delhi school initiative, which are there, happiness curriculum, which can be a new thing. I also use certain examples of other countries, so Netherlands and say Japanese, Chi Tokutai is something that they follow in terms of maintaining a balance in children's education. So anything that you pick up from the newspaper, have a ready collection of that in various areas. So governance is certain things. NGOs, SHGs, make sure that you have examples of, say, an environmental NGO which is doing good work, or SHG as well, or say in the area of political awareness. Have these examples so that you can pepper your answers with them, because these are questions that come every year. SHGs, NGOs, role of civil services in a democracy. Have certain templates ready for say a role of civil services in a democracy, or if a question on civil services. I usually started with, say, Sardar Patel and his quote on how it is the steel frame of India. So have certain things ready so that you don't have to think too much in the final paper, right? So this was on governance. Third is IR, right? IR, there are again, I would say, usually questions that are asked on neighboring countries. This time I think there was this question on AUKUS, so questions on, say, regional organizations. So if whatever is there in the news recently, make sure that a couple of regional or world organizations, say the WHO, WTO, figure out what its main issues are, problems are, how to solve them, what its solutions are, and a way forward. So have certain templates ready of neighboring countries as well. Say, for example, there were certain things in, say, China or US and the neighborhood policy. These are things I worked on already. You can, if you're using, say, any yearly compilations, read notes on that. Figure out something, some introduction that you can start having for those. Say, for example, Nepal, I remember quotes like Roti Beti Ka Rishta is something that I used. Hindi Chini, so that the difference and the shift from, say, where Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai was used, the Mamallapuram summit. Use these keywords in terms of having a positive outlook in the future. And so I think the conclusion should be something, especially in IR, to be a little positive, forward-looking, and talking about cooperation and using and putting India at the central focal point of the world in terms of the new world order. So remember, like in IR, try to have a positive India-centric view at the end. Okay, so this is something that I did in terms of an IR answer, which is usually about cooperation and relations between two countries. With respect to that, there were certain headings in which I used to think of. So these things that you can do before in terms of, say, defense or trade and economic ties, or even before that, historical ties. So if you're opening something, if you're talking about relations between two countries, don't just talk about one or two things that have happened in the future. To have more dimensions, think along these lines in terms of historical lines, defense-based lines, trade or economic ties, then cultural ties, then even in a new sense, science and technology based ties, or say newer technology which is happening, then environmental sort of relations that are there between these countries. So open IR questions on all these different levels and have sort of good tags or beginnings at the end. So moving from an Asia of conflict to an Asia of cooperation is something that you could use, and I think I did use because it was used in one of the summits that happened. I can't remember. So whatever, keep an eye on whatever is happening in the news, and 1 or 2 taglines which are usually there based on the summit, say the Glasgow summit, if something was there. 1 or 2 taglines, just remember, so that you can use in the introductions and conclusions. Keep writing, keep collecting all of these things if you're, say, not writing the mains right now and plan to do it in the future. Okay, so forward-looking conclusions for this was GS2. Now we come to GS3. Now GS3 is a challenge because it has a lot of information and it has a lot of subjects as well. So what are the things that are covered here? There's economy, there's environment, there's science and tech, there's disaster management, there's internal security. Right? ठीक है, तो इसमें what all you can do, and remember in GS3, especially if you look at this year and the last couple of years, there are 2 types of questions that are asked. One are very specific questions, which it is likely that either you know or you don't know. So say this time question on, say, WHO guidelines about a very specific thing, or say S-400 missile system, a 10-mark question completely on the S-400 missile system and its workings, or say the difference in GDP calculation pre and post 2014, or something about very, very specific questions basically that, you know. And on the other hand, there are certain questions which are slightly open-ended. Say, for example, the ways in which nanotechnology can be used, or robotics or AI can be used, or say ways in which robotics can be used in agriculture, say something like that, right? Or if you're talking about urban flooding as a phenomena in disaster management, or you're talking about security questions which are say about terrorism, or what are the uneven threats, or something was that about asymmetric warfare, or something about terrorism, which are more or less same, right? So there are 2 category of questions. One are very specific questions which come only a single year and they're very unlikely to be repeated in any of the coming years. And the other sort of questions are more open-ended, which are more theme-based, which are sort of mentioned in the syllabus, and will at least be, I think, at least half the questions, if not more or less, right? Based on the syllabus entirely. So make sure that at least those open-ended questions which are clearly mentioned in the syllabus, which are likely to be repeated more or less, say, every alternate year or so, at least those you make really, really strong in GS3. And for me, those questions are usually from, say, disaster management, internal security. These 2, make sure that you are very, very strong with, you have very, very good content, so that in the question that everyone knows, your answer is much better than the person before and after you. So this was something that I personally did. I had good notes on disaster management, good notes on internal security, with a lot of examples, good introductions and conclusions. Science and tech also, maybe not this time, but say make sure that you prepare notes on nanotech, you prepare notes on AI, on space, on robotics, on, say, biotech. Okay, this is a topic which is regularly repeated, biotechnology, nanotechnology. So make sure that you have good notes on them. With respect to disaster management and internal security, how you can sort of structure your answers. So say disaster management specifically, you can talk about, apart from certain examples which have happened in the future, you can do that. And then in terms of solutions before a disaster, because then there are, say, 10 suggestions you can make as to what to do during landslides, or what to do during an earthquake, or what to do in urban floods, because urban floods is something that has come many times in the last few years. But in terms of how to structure that answer, you can divide it into, say, before disaster, during disaster, after disaster. You can use the Sendai framework divisions to also answer that. So try to use, and if, for example, if there are 2 disaster-based questions, make sure that you're not using the exact same structure and exact same solutions in terms of, say, build back better and all of that. in both answers. In one answer, you write the conclusion is being built back better according to the Sendai framework and ABC guidelines. Another one, you try to use another example or another committee's recommendation. Say, for example, if it's on landslides or if it's about Himalayan sort of anything, talk about Deepak Chopra committee and how development needs to be in a certain way, or the Madhav Gadgil committee, which talks about not developing recklessly and conserving thoughtlessly, something like that. So try to have certain differences and have one or two things which you can use alternately in the answer. So this was disaster management. There are 5 to 7 disasters that you can sort of have notes on or prepare accordingly and have a certain structure to it. In terms of, say, introduction mein, you can talk about, say, the Chamoli thing, flooding which happened here, or say the oil spill that happened somewhere else, whatever the question is. Or say I remember there was this question on urban floods which came in one of the test series questions. So one way in which you can talk about this is, say, talk about flooding across India and the difference here. So for example, if here it's happening, it's because of, say, over flooding of the Brahmaputra, right? When it happens in Bihar and the northeast, right? It happens because of this. When it happens in Chennai, it's because of something else. If it happens in, say, Mumbai, it's because of unplanned urbanization. If it happens here, it's usually because of glacial outbursts. So you can just talk about flooding here and use maps and diagrams to sort of show how different flooding is happening in different places. So disaster management, this was there. For security, again, if you're talking about solutions, talk about solutions that the government can take, talk about solutions that the armed forces can take, talk about solutions that the local people can take. So try to divide everything in terms of solutions, causes, and even within that, subheadings, right? So even anything that you're doing, legal steps, institutional steps, as we talked about in polity, here community-based steps, army-based steps, local-based steps, and examples of that. So in GS3, in the way forward and everything, I think you can use a lot of government schemes, government steps that have been taken. This is one space. Even in GS2, in the governance part as well, talk about government schemes, government steps, government committees which are there to make your answer better. So disaster management, security is done. Then environment. Environment may, again, apart from examples, and there are enough, you can use various sources for that as well. So say down to earth, if I was like really free and I didn't feel like studying anything, or I was getting too bogged down, I used to just like open down to earth videos, the magazine videos that you get, and any new example of something that has happened nicely in some part of the country, someone is doing good things for the environment, I used to just remember them and write them down and use them in the conclusion or in the main body of the answer. So examples is something that you can use in environment, even in terms of, say, something, so the Italian hydropower project and its influence. So based on whatever question is being answered. This time there was this question, say, on water crisis. So in terms of an introduction in environmental questions, it can either be an example of, say, a water crisis, say the Chennai water crisis, which has led to issues there, or you can talk about data, right? So data and examples are certain ways in which you can start it. Data, water crisis, say the Niti Aayog report about, you know, these many districts, 70% will be in water stress, this thing by 2022 or something like that. So remember these few data points is, say, for plastic, for water, for soil, for all of that. And in the last 7 days of your, before your mains, make sure that you're just going through all of this data, these examples, and use it in your answers, right? So water crisis or anything that was there, I think this time the question was about micro irrigation and water crisis, but anything which is there, you can talk about the issues in the introduction itself through an example or through in data to catch the attention. In terms of body, divide it in however way you can. So I haven't written the question here, but the question I think was about, in light of the current water crisis, how far do you think micro irrigation can benefit? So firstly, in terms of water crisis, you will just show after this thing that, you know, water crisis is something that is affecting. So this is not a main part of the question, the water crisis. It's saying in the light of the water crisis. So after an introduction about, say, the part of India which is under micro irrigation. I remember I did use this data. I don't remember the data right now, but the area of India which is currently under micro irrigation, which is very, very minuscule. You start with that introduction. You just talk about slightly about the water crisis. कि अच्छा देखो नीति आयोग ग्रुप ने ये बोला है, इतनी जगह ये है, इतनी जगह वो है, या फिर वाटर क्राइसिस सॉइल मतलब फार्मर्स के लिए इतना है, लोगों के लिए इतना है, और इसका क्या और इम्पैक्ट हो सकता है. देन यू टॉक अबाउट द मेजर पार्ट ऑफ द क्वेश्चन इन टर्म्स ऑफ कैन माइक्रो इरिगेशन solve it. So micro irrigation you can start by little by what it is, just in terms of one line, and say 1, 2, 3, 4 ways mein it can help. Then you can also talk about, say, micro irrigation will help in this way. At the same time, it is not a silver bullet. It is not the only thing. So the next part of the question you can talk about other ways as well. And then in the conclusion, you can talk about, say, having a holistic approach, having this overall sort of thing will help us solve the water crisis. End mein you can talk about, say, the Mehir Shah committee, which especially talks about water and treating it as an entire system rather than having a piecemeal approach. So this is a way in which you can handle environment-based questions using data, using examples, using committees which give suggestions, especially as the way forward. Okay, then we have economy. And economy, especially recently, it's become very tricky as to how to approach this, because sometimes random questions are answered. But make sure that whatever is at least mentioned in the syllabus, you have enough data points on that. Here also, you can begin with certain data that is being there. This time there was this question on, say, GDP was there. There were certain questions on, say, budget, and also those things I think you can't sort of predict. If those are there, you have to tackle them as they come. But if there are certain questions about, say, macroeconomic indicators or anything, start with data, anything you have about that fact. If it's about agriculture, say, so talk about, say, what is the amount of food grains that have been produced in the country, or the percentage of farmers in India, the percentage that is still dependent on, say, the secondary sector or the tertiary sector. So start with that. Again, you can also use, say, according to the economic survey, if something has been given. Whatever data you give, try to back it up. Otherwise also, if there's certain things that the economic survey is saying, the Niti Aayog agenda for 70 at the rate of 75 is saying, you can start economy questions with this. It can give a good introduction. Body, whatever is this thing, it will depend from question to question. But say there are certain things in the syllabus, say railways, say ports. Make sure that at least on these things, although the questions this time are more current based, whatever is coming in the news, but railways, ports, so have certain content on that ready. How much, what is the ratio of railways, say, freight and versus passenger. Similarly, say, committees in terms of way forward, so the Anil Kakodkar committee or the Bibek Debroy committee. These are things that you can work on in economy answers. And so if it's a question on export policy, right? So export policy, it was in the news recently. I remember this from one of the test series questions that I answered. So one thing that you can start with in terms of the government aim is to double it from, say, 2% to 4%, or the aim of you can start by saying that aim of $400 billion of exports in this year have been met, and this is something which is there, right? So these are things that you can follow for economy. For science and technology, I think I've more or less talked about already. I just like to say that last time I think there was this question about biotechnology in agriculture. A possible question can be on nanotechnology in other aspects, or in agriculture, or anything like that. Make sure that you have as many dimensions as possible. When you're reading the newspaper, say in the Hindu, I remember there's a specific page for science which comes. In Indian Express also sometimes there are certain things. Make sure that your eyes and ears are open for all of these examples. You don't need to read the entire thing, but even if there's just one line saying nanotechnology used in, say, making fabric of a certain kind, or artificial intelligence used by Google to do this, or say there was this collaboration between Uber and the Karnataka government regarding artificial intelligence about, say, road traffic. Just make sure that you write that down, jot that down, and next time when you write an answer, use it. So opening as many dimensions in science and tech questions, I think, is likely to fetch you good marks, and these are things that you can prepare beforehand. Lastly, we come to GS4. Okay, and GS4 में again there are two parts. First is the first part where there are usually 10 marker questions, and the second part where there are case studies, and both of them have different approaches in terms of a certain question that was asked this year in terms of the first part of the question. So in my ethics paper this year, I got 139 marks, which was a relatively good score. But relatively, I think at that time I didn't know it'll be fine. But looking back, I feel that it was the use of examples, apart from, say, the basic definitions and the, things of attitude and say ethics, role of ethics, dimensions of ethics that you anyway learn for. Apart from that, it was use of examples, use of quotes, use of, say mythological incidents or characters of stories that I tried to incorporate in my answers, which got me those extra marks. And these I tried to employ both in the first part as well as well as in the second part, right? So, for example, this time there was this question, the first question which was there in GS4 this time, on identify 5 ethical traits. Identify 5 ethical traits on which one can plot the performance of a civil servant and then justify. So this was the question. The second question I remember was something about 10 ethical traits or something of that same sort only, right? So these are questions that no one can say that I know or I don't know. Me, the person after me, and the person after me, all of us know the answer and will write something or the other. The question then now becomes how to get more marks than the person before and after you, right? So in this question, those 5 ethical traits would more or less be sort of similar only. People will pick up any 5 traits based on the Nolan committee or anything else. So I picked up 5 traits, but I tried to also, whenever I was using any point in ethics, I tried to show as to why that was there. So, for example, first ethical trait, I would say selflessness, right? Selflessness, and then I'll link it with based on orientation, service orientation towards the public, blah, blah, blah. So, this is something that can be judged on. For example, say MS Lakshmi Priya on in terms of, say, working day and night for, say, Project Sampurna in Bongagaon. Or secondly, another ethical trait would be courage. But I'd then back it up by saying, see the example of Sanjukta Parashar in Bodo militancy areas, right? Or here, selflessness, I can also talk about Tamboli Ayaj and his, building of a hospital against many odds in Maoist affected areas where, there was danger to his life. So I don't need to mention that in as many words, but say something, explain why, and then give an example. Say something, explain why, and then, so in terms of the second part of the question, which was justify, I am actually justifying why it is there and why those ethical traits are sort of, one can plot the performance, right? Because, and then the end you can sort of justify it in terms of all 5 traits as well, that, these ethical traits are important because apart from, say, merit or apart from, efficiency at work, emotional intelligence is something also which is important, and, humaneness is something on which the public judges the people, and the importance of, say, civil service is orientation towards the public. So at the end you can link all these 5 points together as well in terms of why these are only the 5 that I have chosen and not any other 5, right? So this is something that I could do. So I think I wrote selflessness, courage, another one can be honesty and transparency. So again, try to show why that is the case and where it has been used or seen as being used by a civil servant, right? So this is certain things which I used to do, is write something, give examples. Similarly for quote-based questions. So sometimes there are 3 to 4 quote-based questions where what is given is just a single quote is given, and then you have to say what do you basically understand by that. So apart from, if I knew who the quote was by, so sometimes, say for example, the quote is, the only thing for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Say if this is the quote. So if I identify who the quote is by, then I can say, this quote by Edmund Burke or someone else is something which tries to show, etc., 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 whatever I'd like to state by that. And in these code-based questions, because this is something which people don't understand as to how to approach them, there can be other ways of approaching it, but I personally try to approach it by explaining it through various real life examples and also linking it to other philosophical quotes and other philosophical sayings by other people as well. So say if this is a quote, I try to say, this means that as good citizenry, we must hold our people accountable, hold our leaders accountable and constantly question them. So for example, Lokpal agitation was there to make sure that anti-corruption stance was taken, right? So through once I say something that what I mean by it, then I can use something else. Then another example would be about self-reliance. So I would then talk about self-reliance in the context of environmental ethics, that rather than pointing the blame on someone else, we should try to change our own lifestyle and talk about these things rather than going along with it. And here I would use again the example of Mahatma Gandhi as to be the change you want to see in the world, right? And at the end I would probably say that maybe three reasons, and sometimes these quotes are there, so there's not necessarily something that there's a counter to, but sometimes the quotes you can't completely agree also. You can say that these are certain ABC reasons why it can be implemented and why it's the correct thing, but at the same time there is an alternative picture also which can be shown, not necessarily contending it completely, but saying that it can be seen in this way also, at the same time, or yet. So in these code-based questions, you can sort of divide it into, say, 75%, 25%, in terms of 75% agreeing, 25% not agreeing, or completely, so even 90 or 10% also sometimes, right? And yeah, and then I think I ended this with a quote by Kant where he was saying that what one ought to do, one can always do. So using one quote and then interspersing those things with other quotes as to what, say, other people have also said the same thing in different words, and also linking it to real life examples where, say, the Lokpal agitation happened because of this, or for example a historical example, say in Hitler's Germany, for a long time, people did not say enough, and this is why certain atrocities happened, and those people are also equally complicit in that. So you can use historical examples, you can use real life examples, you can use mythological examples. So for example, I also used in this question that even people like Dronacharya and Karn, during the Chirharan, they did not say anything. So they were equally culpable as, say, Duryodhan or the Kauravas. So merely sort of not saying anything makes you equally culpable in the act. So using different varieties of examples, I think makes your answer a little more interesting in ethics. So rather than just thinking that, I'll only use ethical values, I'll only use what I read in the books, try to be a little more creative in GS4 and the ethics paper and the essay paper. This is something that I tried to do, and it did give me some sort of positive results. So you can also try it while you're writing and practicing answers. Okay, so this was the first part of the question, the first half of the paper, GS4, which are relatively 10 marker short questions. So I think there's a lot more opportunity to be more creative. The second part is the case studies. And case studies also you can approach in different ways. I can't exactly share the entire long questions right now, but in terms of, so sometimes there are certain things, there are also differences in terms of how the case studies are there, but usually there are, say, A, B and C, or sometimes A and B. So there are usually 2 or 3 sub questions in the case study, and there are around 4 to 5 pages to answer the case study. Before answering, say, if this is question number 7, right? If this is question number 7, A, B and C, while answering, I used to at least write 1 paragraph or more before I started answering 7A, B and C, right? So this before wala part could either be started through some nice quote, it could either be started through a nice anecdote, related to what is being taught, what is being talked about. It can again be started through listing the ethical dilemmas that are there in the case. So say the above case talks about the ethical dilemma, certain ethical dilemmas A, B and C in a certain line. You can start with that. You can start with a quote, you can start with an anecdote, you can start with, say, both. You start with a quote and then you link it with, these are the ethical dilemmas being faced. You can also if the question says not asking, so if the first question is about stakeholders, identify the stakeholders, then you won't use stakeholders here. But if say it's not asking about stakeholders, then you can start the introduction also apart from whatever the first line you're saying about a stakeholder analysis. These are the following stakeholders there. Okay, so these are various ways in which you could start your introduction. You could also start it by linking it to any recent events that are there. Okay, so if there's a question about, say, farm laws or farmer agitation, or a certain protest or certain riots somewhere else, so you can say that the above case is similar to or highlights a recent case which happened here in this thing, where certain ethical dilemmas of A, B, C were there, right? And certain questions of freedom of expression, A, B, C, were talked about. So you can link it to any recent event which has been there, so it shows that you're aware of what is happening, right? So these are various ways in which you can start these introductions. There are 5 to 6 case studies, so make sure that you're not using the exact same template in all 6 of them, otherwise it gets a little boring. So try to change a little bit also. If you think that, I think it's slightly better to change it, but no, don't do it unnecessarily also. If you think the demand of the question is such that you don't need to change it, and if there are certain quotes that you feel are nice and you would like to use in 2-3 things, then it's fine. But again, don't try to repeat the same quote also in more than 2 to 3 questions, because then it feels that, this is the only quote and you're just repeating it again and again. So any sort of examples in quotes you use, you can repeat it once or twice, but not more than that, because it feels a little done. So this is the introduction. In terms of the body again, you can do a little, have a little diversity. Certain things that, again, in terms of the introduction or the preliminary part, say if you're writing 7, I've just written the introduction and other parts. Again, one thing you can do in terms of analyzing the question is making a table like this. We're talking about fact and value, or when you're talking about, say, if it's a major part of the question, talking about what are the values shown in this, or what are the ethical issues in this case. So then you can talk about fact, or you can talk about value or issue here. So if, say, say molestation has happened, right? Or molestation of, say, A, B, C, or say second part of the question is censorship of newspaper, A, B, C, X, Y, Z, right? So these are certain facts of the case study, and fill it in with exactly this, say the name of this person, name of this person. This is the fact of the case. The value or the issue involved would be, say, gender justice, right? Then right to equality. So then here also I think you can mention, so here you can say mention SDG 5 if it's something else. Maybe here it's not SDG 5, but like SDG 5 you can mention here, right to equality, article 14, 15, right? So try to use, I tried personally to use, I wouldn't ask you to do anything, but I personally try to use articles of the Constitution, my knowledge in polity, in governance, in these questions as well. So right to equality, this. Similarly, censorship may, you can write, right to freedom of expression. So article 19 can be highlighted. Certain DPSPs can be highlighted. So fundamental rights, DPSPs, these also, apart from the ethical issues per se, honesty, integrity, brotherhood, cooperation, I try to use these things as well in my ethics answers. So this is one thing that you can use in 1 or 2 ethics answers as well, if it's asked in a certain way in terms of highlighting ethical issues. Another thing that you can do is stakeholders. I already talked about ethical dilemmas. You can use in terms of, say, suggestions that you're giving. I also try to use apart from whatever suggestions that you have, you can link it with governance examples. So if it's a question on, say, Maoist areas, so I remember using this example of, say, I think it was Abhishek Paliwal somewhere. Similarly, there was this Swabhiman Anchal area in Odisha, which had done really good work in the Maoist affected areas in terms of bringing development there. So don't shy away from using these additional examples from governance, from GS2 in these papers as well. And again, for the conclusion or the ending, you can have a forward-looking quote. You can even you can use quotes. You can use you can just list down whatever ethical issues were there in terms of key terms, key ethical terms. Say ideas of professional integrity or there are certain terms, I think, and I used toppers copies. I've started, I forgot some of them right now. I haven't written this down here, but there are certain terms that you can identify from toppers copies in terms of, say, good governance, ethical good governance, or certain SDGs, or sabka saath, sabka vikas. All of these terms, I think you can keep peppering your answers with, and especially in the conclusion. Make sure that your conclusions are very forward-looking in all 4 papers, and these terms are certain things which can help you in doing that, right? So this is basically it for all 4 papers. End may, I'd just like to say that overall, for questions you don't know, don't worry in the final paper, because everyone here there would be on the same page as well. Everyone would be at the same page. So make sure that whatever you know, try to fit it into those answers. Don't leave answers blank. Try to fit it into the subheadings of the question that are being asked to the best of your ability. Be confident when you're writing those answers, at least when you're writing them. Don't be confident, don't be overconfident when you're analyzing your answers. Make sure that confidence is only when you're writing the answers, but when you're analyzing and there's the space for improvement, make sure that you constantly improve based on the feedback that you're getting. Overall, identify so for example, if there is a certain comparison that you need to do between A and B, and it's given clearly in the question, see if you can make a table for that. See if you can do something different for that. If there's a small part of the question which is not the main part, try to say, for example, the advantages of certain thing, and it's not a major part of the question. Try to like answer it through this, right? If there's a comparison, try to say use this to sort of save space, where, say, if you're talking about moderates and extremists, then say talk about in terms of method this, or aims, something else, right? So try to keep innovating in terms of how you're answering these questions, and identify certain key terms for each paper which you can use in the end, say SDG, say $5 trillion economy, say sabka saath sabka vikas, ethical good governance, idea of new India, Asia of tomorrow. So these things I think can help you in writing better answers, and I think this was mainly it. And only I think these are things that I personally tried to follow, and I tried to personally cultivate before my mains answer writing. I hope some of it helped all of you, and try to incorporate only those parts which you think you can and which you think will help you. If you think there are certain things which do not match your style and it's only inhibiting you, it's not helping you write good answers, leave those parts out. But whatever I think you could incorporate from today's session, I hope you did, and I hope all of you would implement it in some way in the future. All the very best for all your endeavors. Thank you.